Series 9. That's a song I wrote. It's on Spotify. Just look up Series 9. Anyways, today we're talking about Doctor Who Series 9, and I have to preface this video by saying I do apologize for yesterday. I made a big note about the fact that I hadn't recorded one of these videos in like 5 months. Seriously, the last time I recorded, which was only 2 days ago, the Series 7 ranking video, it was recorded 5 months ago, and the reason I know it was 5 months ago is it was before the birth of my son. So I haven't recorded one since. And yesterday I was kind of bragging about the new setup around the room and the new audio quality. What I failed to recognize, and you guys can attest that in yesterday's video, I went and checked that our audio was working. What I didn't check is where the audio was being recorded from. And so I do apologize for the quality of yesterday's audio. It was being recorded through my laptop, and that's why it sounds so bad. Today, I have a condenser microphone set up through 2 separate pop filters, including an audio shield going through an Apollo Twin, which itself is going into my computer through 2 separate compressors. So hopefully today's audio sounds quite a bit better than yesterday. But welcome back if you're new to the channel. We have been going through every single every single season of Doctor Who over the last couple weeks ahead of the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who. The anniversary is actually tomorrow. But today we're going to be ranking every episode from Doctor Who Series 9. Starting from the bottom to the top. Now, one thing to note with this specific video that I'm recording right now is my experience with Series 9 might make me biased towards it. Specifically, certain episodes. I might like a lot more of these episodes better than most people do. And the reason for that is Series 9 was the first full season that I watched every single episode as they aired live on BBC America. So it would have been 6 hours after the rest of the world. And it was the first time I'd watched Doctor Who as a pretty major Doctor Who fan. I had started writing my own fan fiction, stuff that hopefully one day I'm able to turn into some kind of novelization. I have some pretty well thought out stories that I'd like to get out there based around Doctor Who, and we'll see if eventually if I could get the copyright for that, that'd be fantastic. I'd love to have Doctor Who novels under my name. But that being said, my obsession with Doctor Who led into Series 9. So my hype for Series 9 was way over the top. I loved pretty much every episode as they aired. I loved the two-parter to open the season just because I loved the different callbacks to past episodes and lore throughout the series. Obviously, now with retrospect, I understand that was mostly recency bias. The opener is not that good, but we will talk about that. Let's start from the bottom to the top. In my opinion, the worst episode, and from what I gather, most people's least favorite episode, at least quality-wise, of Series 9, going in F tier, is going to be Sleep No More. Now, this was I almost said controversial, an experimental episode of Doctor Who. It was done all in found footage, which this episode aired in 2015. This would have been 8 years after Cloverfield and 15, 20 years after Blair Witch Project. Found footage was not really a trend when this came out, and it's also a Mark Gatiss episode. And if you've been following along with my past rankings, one thing that I didn't say out loud necessarily, but that you might be able to pick up on is I think Mark Gatiss is a terrible writer. Genuinely. I do not care for Mark Gatiss. I think he's an all right actor. I think he's got a fantastic voice. I think he's a horrific writer when it comes to Doctor Who. His episodes have almost always been very bland, with a couple exceptions that are probably peaking low A, high B range. I don't like Mark Gatiss as a Doctor Who writer. This episode has a lot that it's trying to say. It's very concept heavy, very, very not lore enthusiastic. With itself, it's trying to set up something. It should have been a two-parter. It should have been, if they would have come back to the concept in Series 10, we might have different opinions on this episode. This episode is one half of an extended story that is not told very well. It looks very bad. I mentioned yesterday, in the video yesterday, that I think Doctor Who, before the Chibnall era, before they switched to the new camera style, I think the best Doctor Who ever looked in the new era was Series 7B. Despite all of its faults, I think Series 7B looks the best, especially when there's no color filters going on. I think Series 7B looks very good. Series 8 took a step back. Series 9 also has issues with color correction. You could probably notice it if you can see the bottom of my screen here with all of the different episode, the stills from the different episodes. Each one is kind of its own color thing going on. And it's like they learned how to color correct and they didn't know how to stop themselves. They just kept going until it was too much. This episode is very blue, very black, obviously told in that found footage style. So there's not a direct narrative character necessarily. I think the cast is very weak in this one. When this came out, and keep in mind, I remember this because this was the first series I ever watched. When this episode came out, Doctor Who, the social media page, made a huge deal about Bethany Black, who plays, oh gosh, I can't even remember the character's name. The animalistic character. It's not Deep Ando. Sleep No More Doctor Who. Give me a sec. Sleep No More Doctor Who character's name is 474, the big grunt, I think they call it, him, her. Bethany Black was described as the first, as an actor, she's the first trans person to play a trans character in a British TV series, was also the first openly trans actor in Doctor Who. They made a huge deal of this when this came out. And the episode came out, and I'm like, it didn't have anything to do with transgenderism, but they made such a huge deal about this person being in the episode as an actress. The character sucks. And not only does the character suck, the performance is horrific. And so Sleep No More has this weird spot in the Doctor Who mythos where everything about it, concept-wise, who they brought in, the writing, just everything about this episode before the finale. This is the last single-part episode, kind of, before what some people see as a 3-part finale. And this episode completely fell apart. Now, the reason I bring up Bethany Black, and this isn't like a transgender issue at all, but I wanted to point that out because earlier in Series 9, we had the 2-parter Under the Lake Before the Flood, which we'll talk about in a bit. And they brought in an openly deaf actress. And not only did they bring her in, not only was she fantastic in the episode, but they used her lack of hearing, her deafness, for lack of a better word. I don't mean to sound kind of offensive with the way I'm talking, but they used her inability to hear as not just a plot point, but they did it very tastefully. And so I wanted to just kind of juxtapose those two things against each other, who they're bringing in and what it means to the story. This didn't work at all for Sleep No More. I think the concept is kind of cool. It doesn't make a lot of sense, especially when you try to place this episode on a timeline where it fits with other episodes near and around it. Morpheus is never talked about again. The Sandmen are never talked about again, never talked about before. It's one of the issues we talked about in yesterday's episode with Kill the Moon. How it won't fit in the timeline, so it doesn't make any sense. You either have a consistent timeline or you don't have a consistent timeline. And speaking of consistent timelines, go check out, at the end of this video, there will be a link to a Doctor Who playlist on the channel on the bottom left hand of your screen, or just check it out now if you don't want to watch the rest of this episode or this video. On the channel, there is a 2-hour-long timeline that I made, basically encapsulating the beginning of time to the end of time as outlined in New Who, specifically the new revived series of Doctor Who since 2005. 2 hours long. Go check it out if that's something you're interested in. Sleep No More doesn't work on a whole lot of levels. It plays with the gimmick for no reason, doesn't go anywhere with its storytelling, acting bad. Let's move on. Too much time taken there. Yesterday's video was like 55 minutes long, so today we're going to try to shorten things up. Let's move up to... That's our only F-tier episode that I have. Let's move up to The Girl Who Died, The Woman Who Lived. In that, well, so Girl Who Died, better, but not great. Woman Who Lived, not great either. It's not so good, Al. let's go in chronological order. So, Girl Who Died is a little better. It's campy. It almost feels like Series 9 is kind of campy as a whole. It's kind of split. Like the first two-parter is very campy, very over the top. These two are very comedic, and the rest of the season is just very serious, hit you over the head serious, and they kind of feel out of place. But Girl Who Died specifically, kind of, it feels like a Matt Smith episode, if that makes any sense. They're surrounded by Vikings. There's humor with it. Peter Capaldi is showing off comedic chops, except for the end of the episode. I really liked the inclusion of Maisie Williams in the cast the first time I saw it, and the only reason that is because I liked Game of Thrones, and Maisie Williams was my age, and so I felt connected to it. Looking back, the performance is not good. I'm not a huge Maisie Williams fan. I didn't mind her in New Mutants, and obviously I really liked her in the first 2 seasons of Game of Thrones. That was like, you give people leeway as child actors. Moving into Game of Thrones series 3 and 4, and then specifically when she's on her own in series 5 or season 5, Maisie Williams' acting ability starts to reveal itself. And ironically, that's the exact same time that she was filming these episodes. She is over the top childish in the first half. And then in the second half, she tries too hard to act mature, if that makes any sense. And then we see that again in the finale. We'll talk about the finale later. I like the plot. I do like the plot. It's a very simple episode. It just feels like it's tonally a little all over the place. It was filmed in virtually one location. It's like 3 separate rooms. It's not a very impactful episode. But obviously then in the end, Ashildr dies. The CGI I thought was actually very good, especially for the time. This came out in 2015, which was 3 years before Infinity War. And what was coming out? This was before Batman v Superman. This was before Civil War. So CGI, especially TV CGI, I thought this episode looked fairly good, except for the end. The still that this is from, the ending looks kind of bad. Insignificant episode, except for, of course, the Ashildr death. And then they follow that up in the next episode with The Woman Who Lived. The Woman Who Lived is not a good episode. I think it has its moments that pull it out of F tier. Peter Capaldi's performance is actually very good. His comedic timing in this episode, especially alongside Sam Swift, is actually very, noticeably better than how he acts in the comedy from Series 8, and then the comedy in The Girl Who Died, and the comedy in the first 2-parter. Like I said, I think Maisie Williams is way too over the top trying to come across as a mature character. I used to kind of like her scene where she criticized the Doctor for making her immortal. Nowadays, I don't think it reads as well. I don't think her performance is as good as I thought it was. There's no plot to this episode on its own, and the plot that they added to give it one is boring and at the same time over the top. So this takes place, I think, right before the English Civil War. So this would have been the reign of Charles I, highwaymen, robbers, that sort of thing. It might be taking place during the English Civil War. I genuinely can't remember. I don't mind the makeup of the Leonids, I think they're called. Leandro, the lion dude. I don't think it's that bad. It is better than the Cheetah People, but that was also all the way back in 1989. I just don't think this episode has a lot going for it. The one thing I did want to criticize in this episode specifically is the editing. The montage sequence where Lady Me is talking about her history is edited bizarrely. Like, there's slow motion for no reason. There are sped up sections for no reason. It feels very overly directed for no reason. The dialogue in this episode is egregious. Peter Capaldi drops that line about purple being the color of death, and his delivery is just poor. These episodes are Very forgettable. If Macy Williams wasn't the guest star, these would be very, very forgettable episodes. I think they sit firmly in D tier. Do I have anything else from Series 9 in D tier? I actually have Hellbent in D tier. So let's talk about Hellbent. Hold on, I want to double check something real quick. Yeah, okay. Hellbent. I'm a Clara apologist. We talked about this yesterday. We talked about it the day before. I love Jenna Coleman as an actress. Despite how kind of contrived. So we'll talk about Face the Raven when we get there. But obviously this episode undoes all of the emotion that went into Face the Raven. Stephen Moffat famously can't let characters die. And he should have. Face the Raven was a fantastic send-off for Clara Oswald. It was a very good send-off. Retrospectively destroyed by Hellbent. Hellbent is too self-indulgent. It relies on a lot of lore from the past of Doctor Who. This was getting to the point where Doctor Who was starting to fall off the radar. It had really started to fall off the radar after the 50th anniversary special. Series 9 was a nightmare ratings-wise for Doctor Who. And that's why when they went to Series 10, after having Series 9 been so lore-heavy, that they restarted it with an episode called The Pilot, so that people could jump back onto a show that had kind of become muddled in its own lore. Hellbent throws everything at the wall without being an anniversary special, without having like the added benefit of past companions or past doctors or past masters, that sort of thing. It does bring back the Time Lords, but it also muddles up the timeline of Gallifrey. It muddles up the Doctor's history, which of course now has been completely rewritten by the Chibnall era. It's a weird episode. It's kind of split into two parts. The first half of this episode, nothing happens. And then the second half of the episode, they try to cram so much into it that the pacing completely flips and there's too much going on all the time. Clara gets a fairly decent emotional send-off, but it's tainted by the fact that they already retconned the previous... Well, okay, so we talked about yesterday. The biggest detractor to Doctor Who's Series 8 and 9 was Jenna Coleman's agent. She was supposed to leave at the end of Series 8, and then she didn't. So they brought her back for the Christmas special, and she was supposed to leave after the Christmas special, and then she didn't. So they wrote her back in at the end of the Christmas special, and then we get her back in Series 9, and her schedule filming Victoria and all of her other projects was kind of, I think it was Victoria was filming by that time, if I'm not mistaken. So that's why she doesn't show up in this two-parter. She's kind of in the first half. She's really not in the second half. And then, of course, she doesn't show up for Heaven Sent. And that has to do with Jenna Coleman's schedule. So the retcon of that is a mess. The ending of her traveling in her own TARDIS that's shaped like a diner, the really bad CGI of the two flying through the air that looks like it would be outdated in the Colin Baker era. Not good. I like Clara. I cannot defend the way that they handled her ending. I think Jenna Coleman's performance in this episode is very, very good. I thought the performances of her and Peter Capaldi when they say goodbye to each other is very good. And then they ruin it again in Twice Upon a Time, but we'll talk about that tomorrow. Hellbent had a lot that could have gone right for it, and a lot of it went wrong. It retrospectively kills two very good episodes, in my opinion. That being specifically the latter half of Face the Raven, and then the entirety of Heaven Sent. But we'll talk about those when we get to them. So let's move up to C tier. Oh man. Okay, so hold on. I'm looking at my list here. I separated these for a reason, and I might renege separating these for a reason. Yeah. I actually had Magician's Apprentice up in B tier. I'm going to drop them both. I'm still going to have Magician's Apprentice above Witch is Familiar. Witch is Familiar is not that good. And I can't tell which is which. I want to say that this is Magician's Apprentice. So they're right side by side. They're not very good. I think they have more going for them than the ones below them, so I'm putting them in C tier. I loved these when they came out, but like I said, time has not been kind to these. I like Peter Capaldi's performance for the most part. The change of the 12th Doctor's character has grown very poorly, in my opinion. I thought it fit when I watched it the first time. It really doesn't. There's the excuse that the Doctor changes, has a character progression through the 3 seasons. He really doesn't. He does change pretty significantly off screen between 8 and 9 and then 9 and 10. He has mini arcs in each of the seasons, but between the seasons, it's a drastic change. And so we see that. I do really like the beginning, the kind of just, I like the tension that comes at the beginning of Series 9 with Davros, the kid version of Davros, with the setup of Missy, even though as soon as Missy shows up, it destroys it. I think the scene in the courtyard is very good. I think Jenna Coleman is fantastic. There's a lot right about these episodes, and there's a lot wrong about these episodes. I think these episodes look very good. This might be the best Doctor Who looks in the season. We could talk a little bit more about cinematography when we get to Heaven Sent. But I don't really have a lot to say about these. I mean, the plot's very contrived. The first half, nothing really happens, but that's to its benefit because as soon as stuff happens in the second half, it kind of sucks. I like these episodes better than D tier and F tier. That's really all I can say about them. Like, they're very middle of the road Doctor Who episodes, in my opinion. Not a great season opener. I'll give it that. Like, we're putting them in C tier. Be happy that they're in C tier. Let's move up then to Do I really not have any others in C tier? Good for Series 9. All right, B tier. Believe it or not, Husbands of River Song. The first half of this special kind of sucks. The second half of this special is really, really good. From a it's not even fan service. Well, it's fan service, but it's not nostalgia baiting. It is just fan service. This episode looks really good. Like, genuinely. The CGI in the first half is weird. That's why, like, I don't love anything that happened. I can't remember. Mendelax, Delora, something like that. The King Hydroflax stuff. Don't care for. As soon as they get on the Starliner, I do like. I think it looks very good. I think the makeup is fantastic. I think the premise of this episode is actually very good. It fits with River Song's character, specifically the Moffat era version. Well, he wrote River Song to begin with, but like the more campy sides of River Song, this gives Peter Capaldi the ability to be a comedic actor without that degrading the rest of the series, because it doesn't take place in a series. It's a Christmas special, so it can stand on its own. It doesn't take itself very seriously. It's very fun. And then we get the added benefit of the 24 years. At the end of the episode, River Song gets her sonic screwdriver. The Doctor reveals himself to her. I think this is a very heartwarming episode. Very heartwarming Christmas special. I like this Christmas special. Genuinely, I do. I think Peter Capaldi's great. I think Alex Kingston is very good. I think their chemistry, I think they have the best. Believe it or not, I think River Song has the best chemistry with the 12th Doctor than any other Doctor. And that might be because Alex Kingston is a fantastic actress. If you haven't seen her outside of Doctor Who, she was decent in ER. She's very good in Law & Order. She played a lawyer in the American version of Law & Order SVU. She might have been in the original Law & Order. She's very good. Very good. And Peter Capaldi, I've mentioned before, I think he's the best actor to ever play the Doctor. That's not an original take. But I think the two have fantastic chemistry. And I think this episode was deserved for River Song's character. I hope they never bring River Song back again. Never. Please, no. Your story's done. I liked River Song. I've had enough. We're done. It's good. Decent episode. I'm putting it in B tier. Let's move up to Face the Raven. Let me double check. Looking for 9s on my list. Yeah, let's talk about Face the Raven. So, some people really like the first half of this episode and hate the second half of this episode. Some people really don't like the first half of this episode and do like the second half of this episode. I tend to fall in that latter camp. Where is it here? So the first half of this episode really feels like a sequel to Flatline, and that's what they were going for, but it's not the part of Flatline that I like. They bring back Rigsy. They introduce kind of this concept of he doesn't remember the night. It's basically a hangover episode. You know, he doesn't remember the night before. They're trying to figure out what happened and why there's a tattoo on his neck that's counting down. And then they use a whole bunch of maps, and Jenna Coleman gets to act crazy from the TARDIS for a little bit, just kind of prefacing this idea of Clara has kind of gone off the rails the longer that she travels with the Doctor, because she trusts that the Doctor will get her out of every situation. I actually think that's better portrayed in episodes 4 and episode 5. Episode 5 opens with a very interesting, just kind of the Doctor saving Clara from danger sort of thing. They try to do that again with Face the Raven in the first half. I don't think it works that well. Some people really don't like the Trap Street concept, specifically when they get in there and what that little village means. I kind of agree. I don't understand the inclusion of Cybermen. There might be a Dalek in there too, if I can't remember. Those characters don't make sense to me why they would be there. All of the other ones, that it does make sense to me. It kind of follows along from just the theme that comes out of the Zygon two-parter, where these aliens are forced to hide amongst humans. And specifically, these creatures aren't able to really integrate, and so they have to create their own community in kind of this ghetto of a trap street, which is run, of course, by Lady Me. I think of all of Maisie Williams' performances in Series 9, I think her performance in Face the Raven is her best. Letitia Wright is in this episode, too. Black Panther is in this episode. I think the storyline with Letitia Wright, her character, and the mom is a little contrived, but I do like that it sets up the Doctor being trapped. And what I really do like about this episode, genuinely, this is me defending Clara. Yell at me in the comments if you disagree. I love the plot beat that Clara takes the chronolock from Rigsy. It makes sense. It makes sense with her character, even back as far as Series 7, when she was virtually a completely different character. That is something she would do, especially now that we see her kind of going more into danger. She takes on danger because she believes that she's able to get out of it with the help of the Doctor. It makes sense. That's what makes her death so tragic to me, is just the way that Jenna Coleman portrays Clara in this episode. I think this is one of Clara's best episodes, despite what I said I don't like about the first half. I don't love the rest of the plotting of this episode, but I think the ending is very, very good. Like the last 5 to 7 minutes maybe of this episode, as soon as they realize what's going on, with the Doctor realizing it's a trap, with Clara realizing that she can't survive, like, genuine, criticize me for saying this, I think it's S tier Doctor Who. I really do. I love the drama stuff. I love the emotional stuff. This episode packs a punch. Now, keep in mind that everybody already hated Clara, so that diminishes that character beat, and then it is taken away in Hellbent and taken away again in Twice Upon a Time. Like, this, on its own, the last 5 to 7 minutes of this episode are so good. And they destroyed it. They destroyed it. And I hate that about it. But I like Face the Raven. I'm putting it in B tier. That's my final say on that one. Let's move up then to Under the Lake Before the Flood. Top of A tier. Very top of A tier. There's a few things about it that I'm putting Before the Flood above. This is one of those I can't remember which is which either. I'm putting Before the Flood before Under the Lake. I like the setting. I really like the fact that they go back in time to kind of this fake Soviet town, to the point where, like, the first time I watched it, I was disappointed because in the trailers they kind of showed us this Soviet village, and everyone was so hyped that they were going to have like a Russian-based episode that was going to be better than Cold War, and then they didn't because it was just Scotland and it was a military exercise. I really like Before the Flood. I think it adds to Under the Lake. I thought Under the Lake was strong on its own. I still think it's strong on its own, but it's mostly a setup episode that has the benefit of the second part being so good that it itself retrospectively creates that much more air around the first half. I think this episode is very well directed. I think the color correction is actually done well, specifically because in the first part, they use green and blue color correction to give it the appearance of being underwater, and I think that works perfectly. There's a behind-the-scenes look on how they made this episode that is fantastic. Talks about how they gave what was a sound studio a feeling that it was genuinely underwater. And then I like the way that this episode looks when they go to Scotland in the second part. I talked about the inclusion of the deaf character, I think is very good. One thing to note, this two-parter I think I might be forgetting some, but I want to propose, at least in my opinion, that this two-parter has the best supporting cast of any episode of Doctor Who during the Stephen Moffat era. It might even challenge some of the stuff in Russell T Davies. Like, each era has a very good episode with supporting characters. Russell T Davies era, even though it's a Stephen Moffat episode, I want to note Silence in the Library, Forest of the Night had a very good supporting cast. Like, all of those characters, you're genuinely like, and there are other episodes like that too. Chibnall era, Haunting of Villa Diodati, you sympathize with the side characters. I think this episode has some of the best supporting cast in all of Doctor Who. I think it's an A-tier episode, A-tier two-parter. I think both of the episodes benefit each other very well. I think it's a very tight script. The ending of the second part is fantastic. Yeah, I really like them. I loved them when they came out. I still love them. Let's move on to S-tier. Series 9 has 3 episodes in S-tier. Zygon Invasion, Zygon Inversion. I'm putting Inversion above Invasion. To be honest with you, Invasion might be an A-tier episode. I'm going to drop Invasion to A-tier. It's very good. It doesn't have the benefit of the Bonnie stuff in the second half. I think it's a lot of buildup and a lot of nobody's ever really sure what's going on. I think it feels too much like a Chibnall episode, the way they're jumping all over the place. I don't love the different location stuff. I don't love that the Doctor and Clara are on 2 different wavelengths, and they, like, there's a mystery to it, but it feels less like a mystery and more like a jumbled mess of plot, if that makes any sense. They had to get Clara one spot, they had to get the Doctor another spot. It feels like it's missing something. The second part is fantastic. All of the stuff with Clara in the house, that kind of harkens back to Last Christmas. It's very similar dream sequence. Jenna Coleman's performance in the double role, oh my gosh. If you weren't impressed with Jenna Coleman's acting before this episode, go back and watch this episode and tell me that you are not convinced that those are 2 separate people. Like, I'm not saying I can't recognize that Jenna Coleman is playing 2 different parts, but she plays the characters so differently. Bonnie and Clara, she plays them so differently that they genuinely on screen feel like 2 separate characters, and that is the greatest praise I can give to an actor trying to play 2 different roles. And I want to mention that because of the fact that you look at someone like Peter Capaldi, it wasn't the same episode, mind, but like, even when you think of his performance as the 12th Doctor and his performance as Caecilius in Series 4, they feel like Peter Capaldi playing a character, whereas in this episode, at least to me, it feels like Jenna Coleman is playing Clara and Jenna Coleman is playing Bonnie. What is there to be said about the monologue? The monologue is great. There is one line that I don't love Peter Capaldi's delivery. It's the "you hold it tight" line. I think that's a little campy, a little over the top, but I sympathize with the fact that the entire thing is one take, as far as I'm aware. Like the entire scene was recorded in a single take. And the rest of Capaldi's performance and the emotion that he brings into it, I can excuse the single, like, over-the-top campy line for the sake of he needed that emotion to come out through the rest of the monologue. Yeah, very good episode. Very good episode. Not necessarily resolved in a way that I'm super satisfied with, but very good episode. Very good analogy for war. I don't love the fact that it's kind of a refugee crisis thing. It almost feels a little racist when you try to put that into perspective, but at the same time, the concept of war and the concept of terrorism, very good. Very well handled. And then let's talk about the best episode. Yeah, it obviously going to be Heaven Sent. My favorite word ever is cinematographic. This is cinema. This is Doctor Who cinema. Rachel Talalay, however you want to pronounce her name, I have no idea. She's from Chicago. She's American, believe it or not. Her last name, I don't know. I know she's Jewish. I don't know if there's a pronunciation of that in Hebrew that I don't know. She directed this. She directed a lot of Stephen Moffat's finales. The cinematography in this episode is fantastic. I don't love lens flares, but I think the lens flares in this episode are done very well. One of the best cinematography parts, other than like the scene with the diamond wall. Everybody loves that scene, but one thing that I love is the scene where, and I think it was Verdana who pointed this out in his episode, when the Doctor is digging. They could have done a montage or something or a change of something to show the change of time. What they do is they color correct it. And this is one of the times where in Doctor Who, specifically in Peter Capaldi's era of Doctor Who, where color correction works perfectly. The Series 9 soundtrack isn't great, but I can excuse that for the sake of Murray Gold's entire focus went into this specific episode and its soundscape, and the soundtrack of Heaven Sent is fantastic. I was so worried going into this episode when they announced that Peter Capaldi was the only credited actor. Obviously, they have Jamie. Oh gosh, he played Colony Sarv. He's the one who plays the Veil, and then Jenna Coleman does have a cameo. Yeah. This is a good episode. Looks very good. The dialogue is great. Peter Capaldi's performance is great. The pacing is fantastic. It's too bad that Hellbent exists. This is my second favorite Doctor Who episode of all time, second only to Human Nature, Family of Blood, and sometimes those two go back and forth. It was my favorite episode ever when it came out. I was worried at the time that was recency bias. No, it's a very good episode. It's the best that Stephen Moffat's Doctor Who ever was. We will be lucky to ever get Doctor Who like that ever again. I love that episode. But with that being said, something I forgot to do yesterday's episode. Go through the rankings, bottom to top. So 13 episodes, including the Christmas special here. In F tier, number 13, we have Sleep No More. D tier, we move up to number 12, Woman Who Lived. Number 11, Girl Who Died. Number 10, Hellbent. C tier, number 9, Which is Familiar. Number 8, Magician's Apprentice. Moving up to B tier, number 7, Husbands of River Song. Number 6, Face the Raven. Move up to A tier. Number 5 is Under the Lake. Number 4, Before the Flood. Number 3, Zygon Invasion. And then S tier, number 2, Zygon Inversion. And number 1, of course, heaven sent. So if you want to know more of my rankings, if this is the first episode you're watching and you want to know all of my ones for 1 through 8, and then the upcoming videos for series 10 through 13, there should be a link at the end of this video in the bottom left hand of your screen to all of my other Doctor Who videos. There is a 2-hour timeline video if you want to go check that out for all of New Who put on a chronological timeline from the beginning of the universe to the end. Go check that out. Links to my other channels above my head. Like, share, subscribe, do all of that stuff, and we'll see you back here tomorrow to celebrate 60 years of Doctor Who. Thank you very much. We will see you very, very soon.